Hi, good. I want to introduce everybody to Troy Ruemping, who is, Troy and I go actually pretty far back. He's now a consultant with Keenan Reed, but he and I actually worked together back in, I want to say 2016 at the same client, and then completely lost touch. And then just by happenstance, a couple of years ago, our paths recrossed, and we were able to bring him in to work with us, and it's been great. How are you doing?
I'm well, thanks a lot.
Well, you bring a lot to our team. So first of all, just let me say thank you for that. And right before this call, you and I were talking about what I think is kind of your towering strength with this work. And we'll get to that in a second. But first, you've been at this independent consulting thing kind of on and off for some time in your career. Why don't you start by kind of giving us an overview of the path of Troy over the last, let's say, 15 years and kind of what your life looks like today?
Nice. Hey everybody. So yeah, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool strategy consultant. I have been an IT consultant and a management consultant and a business strategy consultant pretty much since the beginning of my career. And so that started with really large consulting shops, the sort of the big four, big five back in the day, and culminated. I think that the peak of my sort of consulting learning was at McKinsey, and then I spent time also in some larger tech companies and smaller consultancies. Eventually started my own practice in some of those companies as well, always focused on business strategy. So the big decisions around what businesses do and why. In this most recent chapter of my life, so as of a few years ago, I knew that I wanted to pivot, and I wanted to get away from full-time consulting, and I wanted to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And I'm a foodie. I also believe in the power of technology, and so I am currently working on building my own venture in the food tech space, really focused on AI and big data, and that is fantastic and fun and challenging, and it gets me out of bed every morning. But it also is not a full-time job always. It goes up and down, and so I was really excited when I had the opportunity to bolster some of my week through just ongoing consulting work with Keenan Reed. And so I currently work with my current client 50% of the time, and then do my own entrepreneurial stuff 50% of the time. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. So we were talking about, back to your towering strength. One of the things that I think you bring to your clients is a real commitment to what the right answer is. And you have a very honed and effective way to help guide clients to an answer, always in the service of finding the best business outcome, I think. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do this and kind of what your approach is and kind of what's the secret sauce behind how you get this done? Because it's not always easy, right? Like, it requires a lot of sometimes patience and sometimes contentious conversations. And I think you are able to navigate that in a really special way. So tell us, how do you do that?
Well, it's nice of you to say. Look, I had an example just this past week where someone came to me and they said, we need to increase the price of product X, figure out what the higher price should be. And I said to them, why are we increasing the price of the thing? And they said, well, because we want more money. And I said, how much more money? How do we know when it'll be enough? And they sort of looked at me and they're like, what? Like, I wasn't ready to back up there. Like, can you just do the job, please? And that's oftentimes how these conversations start, sort of regrounding things in business fundamentals. I sometimes say that as consultants or as ad hoc members of the team, it's our job to look together at the problem and to figure out what that thing is and fix it together. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm not trying to fix, like, my role here. We are trying to fix that thing over there. And so grounding people in what that thing is, the place to start. It sounds to me like what you really are trying to do is improve this kind of business performance. Or I hear you've got a goal. Did I understand correctly what the challenge is to achieving that? Help me get the context, the lay of the land, the sort of problem solving space, if you will, before I start spouting out fixes to it, because otherwise I'm going to be fixing the wrong problem. But like you say, Lauren, it is, in my view, all about fixing a problem, or going after an opportunity or whatever. And that thing, that problem, that opportunity is not a person. It's not personified. It doesn't have a team. It doesn't have a place in the org chart. Usually, right? It has a basis in numbers. It has a basis in the accounting of the place. I also, I was asked one time to give a short session, a sort of brown bag session on what is strategy making. And I said, look, people study years and decades for this, but let's start with this skill. Strategy making starts with a skill of making good lists. And I said, what? What is that about? I said, look, if you can't look at something and figure out, if someone tells you, I think it's A or B, and you need to be able to figure out, are A and B all the options? Like, does it cover the whole waterfront? Did they leave something off? And so just starting by knowing, well, the potential things here are A, B, and C, and B has two parts, and these kinds of things. So we talked about how to make lists. There's a lot of consultants are fans of this phrase, this acronym MECE, M-E-C-E, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, and it's a sort of tool one can use to do that. But the point is, all these things are sort of applying sound mechanics with our colleagues and our clients, so that we together are feeling more grounded in, okay, I think we are all battling the same demon here. Instead of saying, what's in it for me? Wait, how are you going to get, wait, what's their angle? That kind of politicking is important, but it needs to be layered on top. It's not the sort of problem per se.
Yeah. Okay. You make, I'm gonna ask you a different question than we thought. You're giving me a thought. I think there is a misconception about consultants or strategy consultants, that you give us a bunch of information and we spend a whole lot of time on analysis, right? We're cranking on data or a spreadsheet, or, sometimes qualitative, but we're like going into something. I think you're breaking this notion here. What you're talking about here is really about advisory and sometimes coaching and providing kind of thought structure and guidance. So if you're to look at your work between, and I know you work in a pretty quant heavy role here. So if you look at your work between that more, I'm going to work with you, the client, to help you get the right mental model for what we're trying to do, versus I'm going to go do the analysis. What do you think the split is? You have 100 pennies, right? Like, what's your 100 pennies between those two areas? And then I'll answer what I think it is. Let's see how we compare.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love going back into the tool shed and getting to crank on numbers for a while. I love me a good spreadsheet, man. I can nerd out on Excel all day long. But man, can we all get lost in the Excel when we didn't align first on what the heck the problem is we're trying to solve, or what the killer statistic is that we wish we had from the spreadsheet. And so from the client's point of view, I'm guessing they think of me as a guy who's in their junk 3/4 of the time and doesn't spend enough time sort of back in the closet crunching numbers. In reality, the number crunching is quite labor intensive, and so and there's something about doing less with more. I'm much more a fan of coming into a meeting with the killer slide than a whole raft of Excel tables to take people through. And so it's like that Mark Twain quote, I would have written a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. So that analysis I mentioned earlier with we need to increase the price of X, I thought, well, how much does X currently cost against some reference point? Like, is it high or low in an objective sense now? And then I made a slide that shows, well, these are the benchmarks and these are the competitive, and here's us. And that was the slide I showed. And it was sort of a, walk in, say the thing, be very careful about structuring that slide so it's self-explanatory. It doesn't have anything on it that's not part of the point, and say it and walk away. And so in that sense, I think the work ends up being heavier on the, it's maybe 1/4 narrative making, 3/4 analysis, but in terms of my brand, my face to the customer, the time I'm spending in meetings, it's the other way around, I would say. What do you think?
I was going to say the other way around. So you think it's 3/4 time with the people?
Of my time with the people, they think of me as someone who just talks and thinks.
Mhm.
Yeah. In reality, there's a lot of calculating that has to go on in the background to set you up for that. Because lots of times, we have hypotheses, or there's sort of a general wisdom out there. Oh, we never sell product X. It's because it's too expensive, or the customer really wants us to do this thing in this new market. And then someone's got to go back and test all that, and that can take a while to just eventually say, "Yep," right? So there is a lot of that sort of quant work or analytical work that needs to happen. But I try and kind of shield my clients from that. Like I don't look for a lot of credit for crunching those numbers. I don't get permission to go do that. It's just sort of it ought to be understood that that's what happens in the background, so that you can do the sort of more value adding work of drawing conclusions, making advice, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I'd say it's the same. So my analysis work isn't quantitative, right? Like I don't really work on, thank God, I don't really work on a bunch of quantitative work, but it is like incredibly complex. And it takes, and you can't see, I'm blurred, but this is a whiteboard and today it's clean. But I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to find the right structure to things on that whiteboard.
How do ideas fit together?
Before, like offline, right? Like, and I do spend a lot of time with my clients brainstorming and trying to do the thinking in the moment. But I don't find I ever find the right answer there. It really requires me to go back and like analytically apply a structure to something that they're trying to say, so that we find the right way to talk about a problem that helps people unlock their thinking.
Great point, Lauren. You just made me think about another important principle, I think, here, which is, good storytelling, good argument laying out requires us to get in the shoes of our audience, right? We want to tell a story in a way that it will land with a particular audience at a particular point in time. And gosh, I think it's sometimes depressing to look back and see how many of all the PowerPoint decks that we make, how many of them were just to get one person to make one decision at one point in time. Like that thing sort of falls apart. It has no enduring value because it was very place-based. But that's okay. Like that's what a lot of the work we do. And I think one of the keys is to not only think about what does this audience member want, what are they expecting, what are they thinking, but also what should they be thinking. And this comes back to that point we were talking about at the beginning. Like I want to structure the argument for the person who is coming with an absolute sound mind, the person who's coming without an agenda, the person who wants to know only the important stuff, but all of the important stuff, things like that. Mm-hmm. And I do think that clients appreciate that. That may not meet them exactly where they are. They might be like, wait, why are you talking about this? We don't care about that. And you say, you should. Right. And not because like, I'm not trying to criticize you. I'm just saying like the numbers require you to pay attention to this part of the story. Yeah. And, you want to talk about profit and us saying we need to increase profit, then let's make sure we look at both price, revenue and costs. We have to look at both. And we may determine that one of those is not the problem. It's only the other one from there on out. But if we don't start from that, I don't know. Like, I don't know that in the case of my team, that price is necessarily the problem for driving profit.
It's okay. I just wrote down what you said. That's going to be the title of this interview, by the way. Only the important stuff, all of the important stuff. I spent 15 hours this week working on half a slide. I probably have 150 words on this slide of only the important stuff and all of the important stuff, because without that, the people that we need to influence to perhaps change a point of view or to develop a point of view are just kind of spinning around, right? And it's interesting. I was also talking, this reminds me of like how you invest, right? Like you're a VC, you invest in 100 companies, you only need one to pop. You only need that one moment or that one thing to generate outsized value in order for the investment in someone like us, I think, to be effective. And I don't know if when people bring on consultants, they're really thinking that way, but hopefully, that one moment we have generates so much more, right, than the investment that they've put in us.
Yeah, no, I think most clients are definitely not thinking about it that way, for a bunch of reasons. First of all, they figure they already know better. Like, we all think we know better, and so the idea that you're going to hire someone to teach you something, especially something really important that you're not already thinking, it doesn't really match our psychology. But that is, like, we all have our own perspectives, and that's why we get other people involved. The It's funny. I'm just coming back really quickly to that idea I mentioned earlier of making good lists. So when you were thinking about all the important stuff, um, um, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive in plain English is no gaps, no overlaps. Yeah, and it also means everything roughly the same size. And I sometimes joke, this is like teeth. You don't want gaps, you don't want overlaps, and you want all of them roughly the same size. And so when you're making your list, when you're thinking about what the big things are that need to go in the slide, you want only the big things, all the big things. And you want the big things each to be meaningful. In other words, you don't want them to just like kind of both be talking about the same thing, and then it just gets redundant and confusing.
Mhm.
And so that sort of, you're operating at the top of the outline, if you will, right? The big Roman numerals of the outline. And so you have to stay in that mindset. Like, I'm only allowing in Roman numeral 1 through 5 on this. 1A.1.4, not, it doesn't belong here. And so we have to kind of keeping ourselves up there, and everything, sort of at that level, and that does take a certain takes a discipline.
Yeah. Can I add something to your teeth metaphor?
Mhm.
You don't want a molar in front. Right? Like, they've got to be in the right order, but you know this, right? Like, when you're walking someone through that outline, you've got to do it in the right sequence. And that sequence may be different than how people are thinking about it, but you figuring out that the molar's going back, and then the little pointy ones, and then the nice pretty ones, right? But that's
Nice.
that's a
Very
key part
nice.
of what we do. All right, I'm using that. Okay, last question. You mentioned that you only do this 50% of the time, and you work on something else 50% of the time, which requires that you have a completely different positioning of your expertise and your industry. How did you do that from someone who worked for a long period of time as a strategist? How did you pivot? And how do you show that the skills that you have from one side port over to the other?
Yeah. So in my other life, I am building a lot of new skills, and the long-term play here is to be not only an owner, but also, because it's my own venture, I'm also individual contributor. Like, I'm analyst in chief, right? And boss at the same time. And individual contributor, usually at, sort of in our stage of our career, by the time you get where we are, you better be really good at something if you're going to be an individual contributor, right? We're past the sort of neophyte stage.
Yeah.
And we may be relative newbies in some of the executive skills we have to build, but in terms of like the work itself, we are expected to have that down and be able to do it with one hand tied behind our back. Well, I had to learn a lot of new skills in this other thing. I was not an expert in topics A, B, and C right away, but I want to be. And what I found, interestingly, is rather than masquerading as being perfect at things that I'm still learning, I lean on these other things that we've been talking about today. I earn a seat at the table by being someone that my new customers and business partners trust, because they know that at the end of the day, I'm going to help us get there, wherever there is. And I'm going to be able to put my own agenda aside, and we're going to be able to solve problems together. And they're going to feel like the time they spend with me will be valuable because I'm a clear communicator and things like that. And so it's all these soft skills, this sort of consulting toolkit, if you will, that actually has been the door opener, so that then I can get in there and try doing, building things, a different kind of thing with a different set of tools. And so whereas in my Keenan Reed time, I spend a lot of time in Excel, and a lot of the work is quant heavy, and it's business strategy and finance related. In this other area, I'm spending things that are more in the realm of data science and AI research and community involvement and a bunch of other things, all super fun stuff. But I am learning that I am only as, I've established a path to credibility through my soft skills, instead of just saying, look, I am a badass on this thing, take it or leave it. That also is great, if you've got the chops to do that. But that wasn't sort of how things are working for me. And And it also is totally working that way. Oh, and by the way, it makes everything a lot more fun, right? Because now instead of showing up to everything and just having to be an expert, because that's the way I sold myself, I get to be me and lean on the skills that I built over a while.
Yeah, and have fun conversations in new areas, because your brain, I'm sure you're like me in this, like whatever I've learned now becomes boring, right? The next thing is what I want to learn. The next thing is what I want to unlock. I want to solve the next puzzle, whatever that is. So,
dude, I mentioned I'm a foodie. The stuff I have learned about food tech over the last few years, it is so cool. Anyone who wants to nerd out on that, call me and we'll talk about it. The computers are coming, baby. AI in food is so exciting.
oh God, that worries me. Okay, it's like I could build a house. How did I learn how to build a house? But I can build a house, or at least tell you how a house is built. I don't think I could actually do it. I won't. I couldn't do that. But well, thank you, Troy. Thanks for spending the time with me, and thanks for being such a pleasure to work with, and for adding so much value to our clients.
Fun talking with you, Lauren.
And I'm sure I'll talk to you in a couple minutes or a couple days. Thanks. Bye-bye.